If you're brand new to watercolor, whether you just got some watercolors as a gift over the holidays to yourself or from your loved ones, or you've had some watercolors sitting off to the side and not sure what to do with them and procrastinating for a while, ask me how I know how this works, because this was me a few years ago. This video is for you. I'm going to go over how to swatch your paints to be able to see. So swatching just means basically testing the paints, seeing what they look like on paper. The way I like to swatch is to see the paint at full strength and how light it can also get. So look at it across the range of different strength of each color. And then I'm going to show you some basic mixing techniques, especially if you have a small palette, and some palettes are even less than this, only a few paints or half a dozen paints. This one happens to have 12. I'm not going to mix all of these colors, but just show you some ways to mix colors, to experiment a little without having to memorize color theory necessarily, which I know can be super intimidating. And then I'm going to show you how to do some basic washes with your paints, and then bring it all together in a little fun demonstration so that hopefully you can get a little picture out of this practice, which I know as a beginner a few years ago I found that super satisfying. Instead of just doing exercise upon exercise, I also liked doing a little picture with the skills that I had learned. So we're going to try that out today. So I've got here a student grade of paints. This is a really good test for me because I actually bought this a few years ago and haven't used it very much. This is the Windsor Newton Cotman Watercolors. They're a student grade paint. This is the Sketches pocket set. If I recall correctly, I believe it's around $20, $20 to $30 range on Amazon. Or at your local art store. That's here in the US at least. I figured it would be great to do a student brand of paint today because, especially if you're new to watercolor painting, it's probably similar to what you have. And also, whilst I will all day, every day recommend professional paints, of which I have more than my fair share, and it's what I primarily use these days, it is a big investment. It can be a big investment depending on how many colors you buy. And so if you're just starting out, the student grade set in the cheaper price range might be a fun way to see, do I actually enjoy this before you're dropping larger sums of money? Do I enjoy what this feels like and looks like, and do I enjoy the potential of it enough to be able to justify spending more money on this hobby? Even if the results, say if you're using a student grade paint, the results that you get probably won't be as good or as vibrant, or maybe they don't mix as well as professional grade paints when you see other artists online or in books using professional grade paints. You won't get the same results, but I think it's good enough to start with, to just really understand, do I like this? Watercolor is a hard medium to learn, and so have some patience. Even if you're frustrated at the start, just try to pay attention to how the pigment moves in water, on the wet paper, on the dry paper, to really see the beauty of this medium of watercolors. Okay, so without further ado, let me show you how I like to swatch these colors. And I'll show you a couple of ways I do it, actually. I'm just looking for a black pen. So often when I'm swatching my paints, I will do, I have a template that I will trace squares in, and then I'll put a black line through the square. So it'll be something like this. And I'm not going to swatch out all the colors like this, but just as an example, and I'll often just draw that in pencil. But what I will do is I'll put a black line through it. I should have just grabbed a thicker pen here, but that's fine. What this black line is, it's to see how transparent or opaque the paints are. If it is an opaque paint, you'll see it start to cover, so not completely cover because they're watercolors, and transparent by nature, but some will cover that black more than others. Okay, so I guess I'll swatch the first one. I'm going to spray these paints a little bit because I was having some trouble activating them earlier, and I also contaminated this one. So if you mess up your paints a little bit, you can do what I just did and literally just clean it off with your brush. I have a paper towel here that I use to mop up extra pigment off my brush to try to keep my water clean as possible. Okay, so I think they all have a fair amount of water on them. So I'm going to start with this first color. And often when I pre-rule this up in my sketchbook, I will write all the colors first before I paint. I have gotten myself into trouble that way though. And where I've accidentally painted the wrong color in the wrong square. So sometimes it's just better to leave it organic. Okay, so this is how I would normally do it in my sketchbook. So I'll do a little bit of the darker color there, the stronger part of it, and then just get a clean brush and bring that down. All right, so this is the lemon yellow hue. I'm not going to do this for all of these colors. I recommend, if you've got some time, that you do it this way. I swatch my colors multiple times in multiple ways. So today what I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to re-swatch this lemon yellow and do all, I'm not going to do the white, but I'll do all of these 11 colors here, just so that you can see what the color range is of this student grade palette. All right, so let me do that lemon yellow again, and I'll actually show you how I'm going to swatch it today, which is generally what I'm doing if I'm going faster and just want to test the colors. So I just grabbed a little bit of this lemon yellow and I'm just letting that blend out, get a little bit of that pigment off the brush and some clean water and spread that across. So this will show you the fuller strength down to the very weak strength. And so you can get a range of depth of color, I guess, of each color by changing the amount of water in each one. Okay, so the next one, and I'll go a little bit faster. This is the cadmium yellow hue. It's kind of like an orangey yellow. Clean my brush there, make sure I've got all the pigment off. Okay, the next one is a cadmium red pale hue. Okay, next one is alizarin crimson hue. So hue means it's a manufactured version of that color. It's not the pure pigment that you might find in more professional grade paints, but they've manufactured the color to maybe from a few different pigments together instead of a single pigment. They've made that up to resemble what the color would typically look like in its natural form. Okay, so that's the alizarin crimson hue. Here we'll go ultramarine blue is next. One thing I noticed in using these paints today is that I had a harder time activating them, so getting that full strength of paint out just while the paint pans were dry and using my wet brush. They weren't very strong, and I was a little disappointed. So that's why, just for the start of this video, I sprayed them just because I've seen other people doing that. I don't normally need to do that to my Daniel Smith colors. They re-wet just amazingly and very easily. But I did that now, and I am getting stronger colors than I was before. So that's just something to note. If you're having a hard time getting the colors to look very vibrant, you might want to pre-wet them. Here I just used a water mister. Okay, the next color is cerulean blue hue. So that would be a lovely blue for sky. It's probably a little bit wet here. Let me take some of this out. All right, and now I'm just going to add some more pigment up here so you can see that at a stronger shade. This cerulean blue hue. The next one is viridian hue. It should be a lovely rich green. Yep, there we go. Okay. The next one is sap green. If I was starting out with watercolor, based on what I know today, so this is not, I did not follow my own advice that I'm giving right now. If I was starting out today, what I would actually do is I would maybe try to borrow some watercolor paints from a friend to see if I like the idea, or just watch some videos to see if I like it. I would actually go straight to professional quality paints and just start with 3 colors, a blue, a yellow, and a red. And I'd probably pick ultramarine blue, Hansa yellow, medium or light, and maybe a quinacridone rose, like a pinky red, so I can mix vibrant purples and things like that. You can mix so many colors just from those basic 3 paints, and for the price of 3 paints of professional colors, it'll probably cost you the same or maybe just a little bit more than a palette like this of 12 colors, but I think it would be more versatile and you'd get better results. But, you know, I didn't do that. I imagine most people don't do that, but it's, you know, one of those things of if I knew then what I know now, that's what I would have done. Okay, the next color I'm doing is yellow ochre. It's a lovely earth color in any brand. I love to do, and I'm trying to do more landscapes, and so yellow ochre I've been using quite a bit in acrylic inks, in watercolors. It's great. Okay, next is burnt sienna. It's an orangey brown. Okay, and then the last color that I'm going to swatch, again, I'm not going to bother with the white, is this burnt umber. It should be a dark, rich brown, so let's try it out. Yeah, that's actually pretty good. Tap the excess water off my brush. Probably that wasn't enough. What I'm trying to avoid here, what I just did without explaining it, so now I'll just quickly review. What I'm trying to avoid is having too much water left on the page. If you do have pools of water on here, and some of them I do, what can happen is you can get blooms as they are drying, if they're drying a little bit unevenly. So if the paint around it dries first and then you've still got a wet patch and that's drying, that water can sometimes push the pigment out. There's nothing wrong with the bloom, by the way. I think a lot of people don't like them or don't want them or think they're not ideal, but it's just another effect and you could use it to your advantage. And I can go over those in maybe in another video. But there you have it. There's the Windsor Newton Cotman student grade watercolor paints, the first 11 colors, not including white, and showing each of those colors from its strongest to, you know, the very diluted version of the color. next thing I want to show you is how to mix colors. And so what I would like to do is mix like a neutral gray color, because that's something that I don't have in this palette. I don't have a black, I don't have a gray, and I like having those colors for shadows, or doing like monochromatic paintings or something where it's just a single color. And so what I do know is that you can mix a lovely neutral gray from ultramarine and burnt sienna. And so I'll show you a couple of different ways you can mix. So one way is to mix on the paper. So I could get some ultramarine blue here. And then I'll mix in some burnt sienna until I get the color that I'm looking for. See how that's going a little bit grey. I just keep adding a bit more pigment. I'm trying to get it kind of dark. I'm looking for, yeah, like a deep bluey grey colour. All right, so that's one way. You can mix on the paper. I would do it a similar way in a palette actually, let me show you a different way that you can mix to just see the variety of colors. So I'm going to use this little ceramic dish. And first, this is a way that I learned to mix colors so I could see the spectrum of colors available from mixing any two colors. And so I'll show you the way I was taught. So I'm mixing those same two colors. I'll start with an ultramarine blue. And I'm just going to put that line here. So to show you, this is the first color I'm starting with. And I want to mix it with a burnt sienna. So I'm going to grab a little bit of burnt sienna and put that under here. And grab a little bit more. That was a lot more. And if you just keep adding a little bit more at a time, you can see that was probably a little bit too blue. I mean, a little bit too brown. I wanted to transition it more slowly than that. I missed out on the dark color that I was hoping for, so let's try and get that again. Paint that on its own and see how it looks. That's the deep color I was looking for. Okay, so that's about a half-half mix. Then if I want to add some more burnt sienna to this, we'll start looking brown-ish, like a grey brown. Add a little bit more. And slowly you'll start to see this spectrum of colors you can achieve with just two colors. Now that's getting closer to burnt sienna. And then if I just put a little bit of burnt sienna at the end, there you go. That is a spectrum of colors you can get just from those two colors, the ultramarine and burnt sienna. So I'm going to label that, pause the video and let these dry, and then we're going to go look at some washes. Okay, so these are pretty much dry. I accidentally touched my finger to this one before it was drying, so before it was fully dry, so I've got some little fingerprints in there, but anyway. So the other thing I did while this was drying, and before I press record again, is just for my own records, and I like to do this so that I remember what I'm doing or what I've done in the past, and I highly recommend you do it too, is I labeled my sheet Windsor Newton Cotman Sketches Pocket Set. So that's the palette that I'm using. And so say if you don't have a palette and you've got just tubes of paint, if they're all the same brand, you could just put the brand at the top and then the names of each paint under each swatch. Or if you have a variety of brands, you could just put the brand with each color. But this is the way I did it to try to stay organized. So I've got each color underneath it. That's what this little arrow, up arrow is. And then I also labeled this color mixing example where I was showing the range of colors that you could get just from mixing, as an example, the ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna, just by adding in a little bit more burnt sienna each time to a strong ultramarine blue. You could always do it the other way as well. You could do this with any color combination of this. So pick any two colors. You can pick the yellow and the green if you'd like, or the cadmium red light and the yellow ochre. You like literally anything, just to test out, what are all the colors that I can mix with, you know, paint X plus paint Y, and what do I like and what could I use them for from the different mixes you see. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do before we go into a little example is just show you the basics of how to do a flat wash. So I'm just going to draw up a little rectangle here, just to constrain myself, and so I know what I'm doing. So one thing that people often do, and I certainly did this when I was learning, I still do it sometimes and trying not to, is they'll not make up enough paint mix to do a full wash. And so what can happen then is you start your wash and then you run out of paint and you're trying to mix up another batch of water and paint mixture in here, and then it's very hard to get it the way you had it at the start. And so you'll start seeing differences in the color, differences in the shade, and not to mention if your wash starts drying and then you add in more wet wash, you can get what's called blooms. And actually what I'll do is I'll set up a bloom to form. I might pick, I'll do it with the cadmium red. I'm looking for a color that doesn't granulate. This ultramarine blue looks like it does granulate a fair bit. You can see the texture of the paper coming through. This cadmium yellow hue does it less so I'm hoping a bloom will be more visible. So let me just give these paints a little, just a quick spritz again. Okay, so I'm going to just start with the cadmium red here. And again, this isn't the full wash demonstration, but just to show an example of what can happen, what a bloom looks like. And by the way, a bloom is not good or bad. It's just a thing. And a lot of people may not like it. You'll sometimes hear it be a rule, like, oh, don't do this because then this will happen and blooms are bad. It's just a characteristic of watercolor. So I'm just going to let that dry a little bit. And then I'm just trying to see how shiny that is. I'll just give it another little bit. Actually, I was going to mix up another color while I wait. Maybe this is okay. So I'm going to make this quite wet. Okay, so the blooms can take a little while to happen. And I was just thinking to myself, gee, I bet by trying to purposely demonstrate a bloom, I bet you I stuff it up and it doesn't happen. But so what should happen here, and we'll let this dry while I'm doing a wash demonstration, is you should start to see this basically a ridge between this bottom half that I just painted now that's more wet and this top half that had dried a lot more. And what will happen is that because there's a difference in wetness, you know, this is more dry, this is more wet, the water will start pushing the paint, pushing the pigment up and out. And so that's how you'll see that hard line. So let me rinse my brush, and I'm going to do, what color will I do my wash in? Let's pick ultramarine. I'm a blue girl. I could do this with mixed color, but I am, just for ease of demonstration, one skill at a time, I'm just going to use the ultramarine. And I'm going to start with a stronger paint mix, and then I'm going to make it lighter as we go. So let's see how we go. Okay, so I'm going to start up here. So with a wash, what you want to do is the opposite of what I just did with that cadmium red hue, is you want to make sure this bottom edge is always wet when you pick up, when you go in and add more paint, because you want that, you want it to maintain that same level of wetness. Okay, now I'm going to start fading this out a little bit, and this is called a graduating wash. So I just added a bit more water to the mix. I don't want it to be too wet, because again, that could trigger a bloom. So I'm just getting a little bit of water on my brush, and then tapping it off on the side. And anywhere it might look a bit uneven, you can go over that again, just like I'm doing, to try to smooth that out. You could even, while it's wet, you could even just go, you could go over it again, as long as it's still wet and you are consistent. So if I want to add another layer here, I can do so. And start weakening that mix with more water. So if I wanted to, I could go over this a third time while it's still wet, or I could add in another color or something like that. And as long as I maintain that same wetness throughout, it should be fine, and without getting kind of hard lines or ridges between the colors. So that is, I was going to say this is a flat wash. I think it's a gradated or graduated wash because it's getting darker to light. A flat wash is probably just a single color like this. I'm saying probably, what a great teacher. I'm more about what's the technique and how do you do it versus maybe remembering the names. So a flat wash, I think, is more just, a flat wash is when it's just one consistent color. Like so. Okay, so here you can see, let me wash my brush so I don't accidentally dip or splatter paint. Just clean that off on my paper towel. So here you can see, and let me just try and bring this down. All right, can you see on this cadmium red hue, you can see the blooms starting to form. So you can see kind of these shapes here on the side, and then there's a little bit of one starting here. This will probably get a little bit more pronounced as it dries more, but that's what's called a bloom. And again, you could do it on purpose because it could look super cool. I've been looking at coral today and thinking this might be a cool effect to put in some kind of abstract-y coral theme painting. But anyway, a lot of people try to avoid that, and that's what causes it. So as these, let me lift this camera back up. As these washes dry, they should be quite smooth. So I'm going to let those dry and then I'll come back. Okay, another tip I have, especially if you're a beginner, is don't try to paint too big at the start, because you've got to mix up more paint, that then the paint starts to dry. I found a lot more success when I was starting, and even now when I'm still practicing, when I paint small and I can practice the technique or trying to map out what I'm doing. So this is a 9x12 sheet of that same paper, the Fabriano Studio Watercolor 25% cotton paper. And I'm going to flip it vertically. So I've taped this off into 4 sections, so I can do 4 little practices on this. It gives me more of a chance to practice. This is what I recommend you do too. I could try different colors. I could try blending colors. So what I'm going to do is start with a light wash and one color. I'm going to stick with the ultramarine blue, and I'm going to start with a very weak wash. So the techniques we're going to be practicing in these exercises for today, we're going to practice our washes because you could never practice too much. And then we're going to do some wet on dry. So we're going to wait for each layer to dry before we add in more details, or at least that's what we're going to do in the first one. So let's see how we go. So I'm starting with a very weak, so very watery mix of the ultramarine blue. And let's see if I even took my own advice and mixed up enough. Put some more water in here. Now I'm just going to dilute that with just water. I probably should have picked a color that isn't granulating because that's not what I was looking for. I was not looking for a granulating effect, but we'll do another one with a non-granulating color as well. And actually, why don't I just do that now? I'm going to, let me get another dish to mix in. For the next one, my water's getting kind of dirty, but it's fine. For the next wash, let me consult my swatches here. I might do alizarin crimson. Just see how we go with that. So I'm going to mix up, I'll get that nice and wet. And I'm going to mix up a watery mix. Let's see if that's enough. Just going to get this paint off the tape there. All right, so I'm going to, again, just start. What I might do with this one is start really light and make it darker as we go. So I'll add in a little bit more pigment as we go. So this is another version of a graduated wash, but just going in the opposite direction. So I'm going to add in a little bit more pigment, mix that. With washes, you do want to move quite quickly. So it's just another good reason to practice, because if you are tentative, there's more chance for delays and then getting those blooms, or getting hard lines in your wash. So you do want to practice getting these quite quick. Right, so that's going from light to dark. And so just a reminder, I started off with a very watery solution, and then as I went down the page, I just added in a little bit more pigment, mix, and then put that in. So one thing you'll notice here as well, I'm not sure if you can see it very clearly. Let me go in. Some of the pigment is building up just at the tape here. And if I don't want it to dry like that when I take the tape off and having that darker line, what I can do is with a clean brush, oh, I knocked the camera. With a clean brush and then tapping out the excess water, I can go along here just with that edge of my brush. And this is called a thirsty brush when it's not very wet. And I can just suck up that extra pigment so I can get it off the tape, but I can also just get it off the sides of the paper. So I've just got the point there, just getting into that. I'll do that along here as well. where there's just, and you want to do this while it's still wet. Once it's dry, it's too late. It looks like I've got a little bit of a bloom here. It's fine. Don't get frustrated if you struggle with this, especially if you're using cheaper paper like this one, and also cheaper paints. Nothing wrong with those, but just know that it's going to be a little bit harder, and that's okay, because then you'll know if you do get into this and like what the possibilities are. You can always upgrade your paper to 100% cotton. You can upgrade your paints to professional quality paints, and it will be like night and day doing these washes. Let's do a two-tone wash. Let's try that out. So what if we used the blue and the ultramarine blue and the alizarin crimson? So again, I'm just going to make sure I've got enough paint mixed up here. So I'm going to mix more of the blue first. Might do it a little bit stronger this time too. And then maybe I'll do a little bit more of the alizarin crimson. So wipe the pigment off on my brush in the water and then just make sure it's clean. Okay, I'll mix a little bit more of this one. I have not done this before with these paints, so you're going to be seeing it at the same time that I am. But there's no reason this shouldn't work, and these colors should blend okay. My objective is not necessarily to blend them, it's to get this graduated wash, but we'll see. So I might start with, what if I start with the pink on top? All right, so here's the alizarin crimson. And I actually might start darker on this one and get lighter. This is another good idea, reason why it's good to have tape, because you'll still get a fairly nice border, but you can kind of be a little bit faster here. Ah, dang it. All right, and just blend this out. Okay, then I'm going to get the blue, and you can either do it from the bottom and work up, or you can just turn your paper around. And then start from the bottom. And I might just put a little bit more pigment there. Clean brush. I keep knocking my camera with the brush. And just get this nice blend. And then again, I've got a bit of extra pigment here on the side, so I'm just going to mop some of that up with my thirsty brush. And another thing you can do if you want to help that pigment move is you can tilt your paper. Just let it all run down. It'll just help it along there. Okay, so that's two colors, a two-color wash. What might we do next? I'm just gonna get this extra paint off the tape here. I know, why don't we start with just water and do like a wet on wet type wash, see what happens. I'm just going to get clean water, well, cleanish, some clean water here, and I'm just going to wet this whole rectangle here. So this is really just playing. You can also do this on both sides of the paper. It's not like I'm going to be giving this to anyone. Maybe I might cut it up and stick it in a sketchbook or make some bookmarks from it, but it's really just for practice. So that's nice and wet, fairly even. And I could have done that with a round brush, but I chose to use the flat just because. All right, now I'm going to put some blue in here, and I'm just going to kind of do it messy and just see what happens. And then put a little bit of the alizarin crimson in here. All right, let's see how that dries. So there's 4 different types of washes. And I'll lift this up a little bit. This blue one should be nearly dry, but I'm going to pause the video for a minute while they dry. Okay, so these are pretty much dry now. I left them for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. This one, this one's still a tiny bit wet here, but I'm liking the way that they ended up. They're not perfect, but who cares? This is just practice and learning. So as a recovering perfectionist, that felt great to say. Got a couple of blooms here in the alizarin crimson wash, whatever. I guess it had a scratch on it. So the paint has, my goodness, my cat, my large cat is shaking the table right now. I'm sorry. I guess this paper had a scratch on it. And so that's, really showing up in that wash. But again, whatever. It's literally just practice, and it's fine. This is the wash that I had some really loose play fun with at the end, just putting on the random colors. And I like the way that has blended out. I think that is a super fun wash. So as a reminder, I basically just painted this with clean water. We fully wet it first, and then splashed and just like randomly put brush strokes of the ultramarine and the alizarin crimson and just let them do whatever they wanted. And so I'm quite happy with that, how that worked out. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to move my stuff around so I can paint on here. I'm going to do some wet on dry layering, meaning wet paint onto dry paper, just to show an example of what you could do with one of these washes. And then if you could doodle on these if you wanted to. What I wanted to show you is how you could make like a little quick mountain scene, actually. So I think this wash is still quite light, which is good. That's what I'm hoping for. So I'm going to start with quite a high mountaintop. I don't want to do half just because it doesn't look as interesting if I put the top of the mountains halfway up. So you could either put them down low or up high. I'm going to start up high because I want to layer quite a few. So I'm going to start up here, and I'm just going to do random. Make this one a little bit more jagged. Okay, and then I'm just going to blend this out again. Get the excess water off my brush. I'm just going to blend that in. And then I'm going to let that dry. And come back and we'll do the next layer. Okay, I just went and hit that with the hairdryer just to speed it up a little bit. And what I'm going to do now that this first layer, well, it's the second layer of the painting, is dry, I'm just going to mix a little bit more pigment in here to get a darker layer. Because if you've noticed when you're looking out in nature, or anywhere. Things that are further away look paler than the things that are close to you. So the closer it is to you, the darker it will look, because say talking about mountain ranges or something like that, that's in the distance, the atmosphere will drown out that color a little bit. So it will look paler and paler the further you go. So that's why I'm going to get darker and darker as I go here. So I'm going to add the next mountain here. Let's add a little bit more blue. Okay, and then I'm going to spread that one out. By the way, I'm not kind of planning these, so just kind of making it up as I go. There's no right or wrong, so do whatever you like. It doesn't have to look like mine. I'm just doing kind of some random shapes and just getting these just even on the wash to minimize the lines. Minimize the streakiness, I should say. All right, we'll let that one dry and come back shortly. Okay, that second layer is dry and allowed me to step away and feed the hungry cats that were shaking the table and demanding dinner. So I'm going to put a little bit more pigment in this ultramarine wash again to make that a little bit darker still, and do the next mountain. Maybe a little bit more. And what I'm doing as well, you may notice, is I'm trying to get kind of a jagged edge here. I might have this one overlap a little bit actually. Just taking liberties and making this up. And then we'll wash this one out. And we'll let that dry again. And maybe do one more layer. Okay, that layer is dried. And instead of waiting for time to dry it, I actually did that one with a hairdryer on high. And I'm mentioning this because I'm not sure if it's the hairdryer or if it's because I had a bit too much water here. But can you see these blooms forming? There's a sharp one there, and then there's a couple of light ones here. I'm not sure if that was because of the hairdryer or not, but I'm going to cover those up anyway with some darker paint. I just wanted to point it out. Just, you know, it's just one of those things. I've painted a lot, and see, they still happen to me. But it's interesting to me that it happened when I blow dried it, because I didn't notice anything in particular that that I did differently. Okay, I think I might make this the last one. So and hopefully this is pretty strong. Let's try it out. So I'm going to overlap. I liked how that overlapped, that last one, so I'm going to do that again. And then just smooth that out with this dark wash that's sitting in my pan. And again, just trying to make sure that I've got enough wash and at the bottom of the wash is nice and wet when I'm adding the next stroke. So this one should dry nice and even. I'll make this a little bit darker. Just adding a little bit more pigment in there. Notice I didn't put more water on the brush, just straight into the pigment because I didn't want to mess with the water levels on here and potentially create some more blooms. Okay, I'll wash my brush and I'm going to let this one dry manually. And while that's drying, sorry about the reflection from my light on that. While that's drying though, I thought I wasn't going to do this, but why not? I thought maybe I will demo drawing over this alizarin crimson wash with a paint pen. Okay, so this is a white Posca pen. It's a PC1M size, which is 0.7 millimeters. And so it's a fine tip. With a Posca pen, you want to, so this is acrylic paint essentially in the pen. You want to give them a good shake. And then it should, I haven't used this one in a while, so let's see how it works. And then it should, there we go. I'm just doing some little swirls here. And sometimes it's nice to take your design off the page, even though you're not going to see that part on the tape. It can make it look like it's extending beyond, and I don't know, I just really like that. So I might make this branchy thing a little bit thicker. Let's give this a bit more of a shake. This Posca's quite old, so we'll see what kind of mileage I get out of it today. So. Probably not really made for coloring in this larger area, so let me get a thicker one. This is a 5M, which is 1.8 to 2.5 millimeters. Better, that's better. If they're a little bit messy, that's fine. This is just a little play session. It's not going to be hung in a museum. So it's totally acceptable, whatever it looks like. Sometimes the Poscas can get a little streaky. So I'm just trying to manage that part. Make this, especially if you go over them while they're still wet, like I'm doing right now, they can get streaky. But they are fun to use, so you just deal with it. And then maybe I'll do some that are off the page here, just for interest. The thing with Poscas as well, when you use them over watercolor, they can reactivate the watercolor a little bit. So it's sometimes easier to use them. It's sometimes easier to use them when you are doing it over acrylic paint, acrylic inks, things like that, because they won't reactivate. But we're just going to use them anyway. That's fine. And then I might just do some little dots, just because I like to do that. So again, I'm not trying to make any amazing work of art here. This is really just a relaxing exercise and just showing you an example of something that you can do over top of your washes. You know, especially if you're just practicing them and have a whole bunch of washes that are completed on sections or pieces of paper. Just you can have a little fun with it and have a little meditative doodling session. I'm trying to avoid, I did these little swirls because I'm intentionally trying to avoid doing leaves and flowers because I feel like everyone does those on YouTube and maybe you'd like to see something different. I know it's still like, I don't know, plant-ish, but it was just whatever came to my mind. Not that there's anything wrong with leaves and flowers. I just wanted to show you something different. And then I might, I just touched that wet wash. I might do also just a couple of like little swirls here that are just in the, made from dots. Just why not? I'll do another one over here just to break up this space a little bit. Again, not shooting for perfection, just having some fun and relaxing. Probably should be cooking dinner soon, but we'll get there. I'm trying to vary the directions and the size of these. All right. So this wash is just about dry. I'm not going to do anything to these washes, just because I don't want the video to take too long. And I think you've got the idea of different styles of washes that you can do. So again, today we went over how to swatch your paints. You just zoom out a little bit. Oh, excuse the hand there. We went over how to swatch your paints, and I used a student grade watercolor for this set, just because I figured that's what, if you're a beginner, you might have something similar to that. So how to swatch each paint, how to label them, how to mix two colors to see all the different colors you can get, and then how to do washes. This is a flat wash, a graduated wash, and then this was an intentional attempt to get some blooms there by letting the top part of the wash dry a little bit and then adding more wet, just to show you how to get those blooms, if that's something that you do want in your painting or something that you want to avoid. So it's probably not a bad thing to practice getting them, so you know what not to do if you wanted to avoid them, as an example. So we started out there, and then we divided up a sheet of, and I'm just going to turn this sideways and maybe lift up the camera a little bit. There we go. Then we went over 4 different washes and things that you can do with them. So we did a plain light wash on this one initially, and then showing the different intensities of color you can get by adding more pigment to the mix. That was an exercise where we created these different shades of blue in the mountain range, and then continued those washes on down the bottom. Again, this was just another wash in a different color. So this was ultramarine blue. This is alizarin crimson. And I did the 2 different ones because ultramarine blue can tend to granulate. And so I wanted to do one with a non-granulating color just to see if there's any difference in that. And then in the last 2 down here, I did a 2-color wash with one color blending into the other color. So this is the same 2 colors again, alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue. And then the 4th one was wetting the entire square and then randomly kind of putting strokes of ultramarine and alizarin crimson. Again, you could do this with any combination of colors. These are just the ones I happened to choose today. So I'm going to take the tape off for the reveal so you can see what each of these look like. All right, so that's with the tape off. Some nice clean edges there. Just focus in on that. So again, there's that mountain range. It's still got a little bit of wetness here. You can see that shine, but I'm pretty happy with how that turned out, especially for these Cotman paints, which I'm not used to painting with. I think that worked out okay. Here's the one that I doodled over. This was the alizarin crimson wash with the white Posca pens. Just showing some details over top, and those 2 washes down there. So, not bad. Fun afternoon of painting. I hope you enjoyed, and if you liked this lesson, please like and subscribe so that I can share more of these with you and help you grow in your watercolor journey. Thank you.